Well, thanks very much, Sarah, for a very warm introduction, which I now have to somehow live up to. So I've given the talk this title, Wild, Natural and Free, which, as Sarah suspected, was meant to be a crowd puller. So, and look, it's worked, fantastic. Of course, you submit this blurb many months in advance without knowing what you're going to say exactly. So hopefully concepts of ideas like wild, natural and free will crop up. Well, actually, yes, they definitely will. But the thing is, as Sarah says, I teach philosophy a lot. I enjoy scholarship into the Pali Canon. But this talk is going to be a right brain talk, as it were, a talk that comes from my much more intuitive kind of holistic side. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say. I've just got an idea, if that makes sense. And of course, the Buddhafield Festival is a great place to try and draw out big ideas in a very creative, warm atmosphere. So that's what I found. So that's what I'm going to try and do. So I'm going to start with a sort of problem situation, which may or may not be something you recognise, but you can probably identify with. And this problem situation is Western Buddhism, Buddhism in the West. It's very popular, it's become mainstream, but in many ways, the Buddhism that's come to the West, the problem situation is that some Buddhists can go along with traditional Asian metaphysics, the whole idea of rebirth, the round of rebirth, the idea that we're stuck in samsara, this endless round, and we're trying to escape to nirvana. The round of rebirth involving the gods, the hell realms, and us practicing in the human realm. And it could be that for many of us, this actually doesn't make a great deal, it's not what we naturally put our trust in, it's not naturally how we think. And so what's happening is that Western Buddhism is taking on a secular character. There's a development of a kind of secular Buddhism. And we see that, with the mindfulness movement. I'm not in any way criticising any of this, by the way. This is fantastic that Buddhism's arriving in the West. Secular mindfulness is of great value. But there's a danger. There's a danger in this secularization of Buddhism. The danger's put very nicely by this cultural theorist, Slavoj Žižek. Have you heard of Žižek? He's a kind of fun-loving cultural theorist from where is it? Slovenia. Yeah, that's it. And he's made the point that Western Buddhism is the perfect ideological supplement of consumer capitalism. It makes us relaxed and calm. It makes us able to change and therefore be perfect consumers of an ever-changing market. Yeah, and when you read that, you think, oh, he's kind of spotted something, hasn't he, that you absolutely don't want to be true, and yet you feel that there might be something in it which doesn't sound great at all, does it? That Buddhism could become that. So the problem situation is the danger of a lack of depth in Western Buddhism, what it means to be a Buddhist. And and one answer could be, we should just take on board Asian metaphysics, the whole lot, yeah. But then there's a sort of literalism involved there. And is that really the answer? So what I want to explore here is one way of thinking through the introduction of depth into Buddhism in terms of more familiar Western mythology. But in no way being literal about this, thinking about myth as metaphor, as a way of seeing things, as a way of relating, as a way of accessing psychological depth, emotional depth in our understanding and practice of Buddhism. And this talk's an attempt to feel my way into that. And I'm going to do that by trying to feel my way into how we can imagine the Buddha, the figure of the Buddha, in terms of Western cultural myths. And I'm going to start by simply evoking the image of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, which is very familiar image, central to Buddhism. And it so happens that I can simply step aside and look what's here. Nothing to do with me. This is put up there, kind of proving my point that it's a central image in Western Buddhism. Maybe Dhivan would like to focus on the image here. The Buddha sat under a Bodhi tree with a beautiful bird in the Bodhi tree. That's quite unusual. My only qualm, my only slight complaint here is the Bodhi tree is a bit small, isn't it? It's like a Bodhi sapling. It's quite kind of green and healthy looking, and there's even flowers here. What's that? Oh, as a Buddha speaking. Yeah. So we've got this image of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, and I think most Buddhists simply assume that, in some sense, this is an image of what happened. Yeah, the Buddha is said to have become enlightened while sitting beneath the Bodhi tree. But, as it happens, when you look at the early accounts in the Pali Canon of the Buddha's awakening, there's no mention of trees. The Buddha simply finds a comfortable spot on the banks of the Niranjara river and engages in striving there and becomes awakened. And then in the later accounts, he sits beneath the Bodhi tree. And that makes you think, what actually is happening there? And I'm just going to, I'll throw in the idea that the tree here represents not a literal tree, but the image of the tree of life, an image of life as a whole, pictured as a tree at which the Buddha is sat at the roots. The Buddha is, as it were, in the centre of the world, at the axis of the world imagined in mythical terms, where the trunk of the tree meets the ground and plunges into the earth, its roots extending deep into the earth. And the image of the tree of life is one that occurs in most world mythologies. Don't think that's an accident. It's as if, human existence on this planet is bound to generate this kind of image. Trees, these long-lasting symbols of strength and life. They're great trees are great protectors of life, as it were. They're great sources of life. They're noble images of enduring strength. There's probably other meanings to the tree of life, of course. And a very famous image, or well-known image of the tree of life in another mythic system is in Norse mythology. You might have heard of Yggdrasil, the sacred ash tree in Norse mythology. Yggdrasil, the tree of life there, is an image of the whole of reality. So this is where I'm heading here. I want to suggest that the Bodhi tree beneath which the Buddha is sitting is really the whole of living reality, imagined as a tree. Now that isn't always clear in the image of the Bodhi tree, but when we think about Yggdrasil, the sacred ash tree of Norse mythology, that is imagined as a cosmic tree. It is enormous. In the branches live the gods, the Aesir, headed by Odin. There also lives a wicked squirrel called Ratatosk, who spreads gossip. I don't know much about Norse mythology, but there's interesting details like that. The roots of Yggdrasil extend into the lower realm, the realm of demons, the realm of hell, and down there lives the dragon Nidhogg. At the place where the meeting point of the trunk of the tree and the ground, as it were, where the roots start, is the well of earth, the sacred well, where the waters that circulate in the tree, as it were, become available. Now, an important part of the image of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree is this Bodhi tree is located next to the river Niranjara. Yeah? So again, we have the repetition of exactly the same image of a tree, a sacred tree, next to a source of water, source of flowing water. So my suggestion is we have a mythic, archetypal sort of image here. The Buddha gains enlightenment at this sacred spot where the well of life is at the root of the cosmic tree. Now you might think that's a bit of a coincidence, but there's a story in the early Pali Canon which, to my mind, bears this out. It's said that after his enlightenment, the Buddha spent 7 weeks sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, in fact moving amongst several trees, several sacred trees. And this is the way myth works, actually. There's often repetition of the same story with slight variations. So in this first 7 weeks after the Buddha's enlightenment, he moves between different sacred trees. And under one of these, the Muchalinda tree, the Buddha's sitting, and a great storm comes up out of nowhere and threatens to soak the Buddha. You can imagine in India, it must have been a storm outside the monsoon season. But a Naga, a serpent dragon, a dragon from the depths who lives in the roots of the Muchalinda tree, emerges, wraps himself round the Buddha 7 times and spreads his cobra-like hood over the Buddha's head and shelters him from the storm. And after the storm, he turns into a human being, he salutes the Buddha, and then he disappears. Yeah? So, can it really be a coincidence that we find that in the roots of the cosmic tree is a dragon, just as in Norse mythology, where Nithhog lives in the lower realm and occasionally appears? It strikes me that we have another symbol from a sort of universal mythology here. And this symbol of the Naga, or the dragon, is a very interesting one, I think. My suggestion is that the Nagas represent the forces of nature in a rather untamed and wild kind of form. So there's this connection between Muchalinda in the Pali Canon story and a great storm, for instance. Yeah, and serpent dragons are generally associated with strength, unpredictable strength, the possibility of things being perhaps going wrong and forces being unleashed. So I'm exploring different images here that we find in the Pali Canon that, if we don't take too literally, link up with a world mythology, or mythology we find in the world, which helps us sort of step from the Indian tradition into a much bigger sense of the significance of the Buddha. So the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree appears now not so much to be an Indian man sitting under a Indian tree, but an image of the divine hero, we could say, to use this language, sitting at the root of the cosmic world tree, in relationship with various forces. So just to continue the theme of the Nagas, I think these are great creatures. In the Pali Canon, they appear as aspects of Indian mythology, the serpent dragons, who they have some sort of doings with human beings, but they're basically, they live their own lives, usually associated with water. The Nagas usually live in water. They're often to be found at the base of the ocean. But But the Buddha has very good relations with the Nagas. And here's a favourite story of mine about the Nagas. It's really a kind of simile more than a story. The Buddha is using the Nagas as a way of talking about his teachings here. He says, monks, in the Himalayas, the kings among mountains, the Nagas work out their bodies and build up their strength. Having worked out and built themselves up, these are big, strong Nagas now, they plunge into ponds. Having plunged into ponds, they plunge into lakes. Having plunged into lakes, they plunge into streams. Having plunged into streams, they plunge into rivers. Having plunged into rivers, they plunge into the great ocean, the sea. There they come into the full vastness of their bodily forms. Likewise, monks, a monk relying on virtue, established in virtue, and cultivating and multiplying the noble eightfold path, fulfills the full vastness of good qualities. And so that the Buddha's using the image of the Nagas, these untamed serpent dragons, living their lives of strength and natural wildness, plunging through the watercourses to the ocean. He's using them as an image for how a Buddhist practitioner should practice. A monk relying on virtue, established in virtue, cultivating and multiplying the eightfold path, fulfills the full vastness of good qualities by practicing the noble eightfold path. The Buddhist practitioner emerges into the full vastness of their natural form. This is the way the Buddha's using this image of the Nagas. So, in this way, my suggestion is that the way the Buddha relates to Nagas gives us a sense that the Buddhist spiritual life is very much a matter of coming into relationship with the natural forces, which we can imagine externally in terms of giant serpent dragons, but perhaps we also experience internally, often enough, in terms of the passions and emotions that assail us. These, after all, are the stuff of our evolutionary heritage, of our biological nature, part of the energy of nature working through us. And the Buddha's take on this is by no means to flatten or get rid of these forces at all, is it? It's rather to come into relationship with them, to train them, as it were, or is that even the word? For them to be the vehicle of training in virtue, in mindfulness even, and in wisdom. So I think this kind of sense of the Nagas as existing as images for wild nature gives us a way to understand Western Buddhism, Buddhist practice, as it were, not in any way as something that is merely rational or just working on the sort of surface levels of our lives. There is depth in the human experience belonging to the whole living world, and we can imagine this kind of depth in terms of natural forces, which we could imagine in terms of these Nagas. I'm just using metaphors, yeah? I'm developing metaphors. So in that way, I suppose I have this, is it a worry? It's going with the idea of Western Buddhism as this supplement to capitalism, yeah? Is my sense of the image of the kind of humanistic Buddhist. Controlled their passions to some degree is a sort of really nice person, but in some ways that doesn't do good service, does it, to to what Buddhist practice really involves, the transformation of our nature in depth. If we're going to be people who are powerfully connected to the forces of nature, powerful enough to be able to make a difference in the world, we're going to want to be a bit more than sorted humanistic Buddhists. We're going to need to be engaged in a bigger mythological picture, as it were, a bigger mythological world, which gives us some form of access to the forces of nature beyond what we know. I guess you can tell I am sort of I haven't got a great structure for this talk. I'm sort of exploring themes as I go along. Let me just take my watch off. I suppose I wanted to mention a bit more about the well. Now it's raining and there's some water coming into our lives. It's timely to think about the well that is supposedly at the base of Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree in Norse mythology, and we can see is represented by the river Niranjara in the Indian story. In Norse mythology, some verses go like this. An ash I know, Yggdrasil is its name. With water white is the great tree wet. Thence come the dews that fall in the dales. Green by earth's well does it ever grow. Thence come the maidens, mighty in wisdom, 3 from the dwelling down beneath the tree. Earth is one named, Verthandi the next. On the wood they wrote, and Skuld is the third. Laws they made there, and life allotted to the sons of men, and set their fates. So, in Norse mythology, there are 3 maidens who live in relationship to the well of life, and deal the water of life out, as it were, and also a lot to human beings, their lifespan. They're kind of like the fates in Western mythology. And now the water of life is falling upon us in this kind of way. I thought it's worth thinking about, well, what does this image of water represent in relation to the tree of life? And of course what it represents is the movement of life within the tree. We don't just have a static cosmic tree, a static living world in which we're involved. This is constantly being nourished by the waters of life moving within it. These waters sustain the tree of life. They sustain everything that lives on it, or under it, or within it, and they provide nourishment. So I'm quite interested in how these 3 maidens who set the laws of nature, as it were, how they might be represented in early Buddhist thought, how we can see sort of equivalence. And in some ways, I think it's really important to note that the Buddha doesn't really deal too much in this kind of mythology. But it seems to me that we can think of, this is going to be a very bold thought here, we can think of the teaching of Praticca Samutpada, of dependent arising, as in some sense connected with the waters of life. Praticca Samutpada is the teaching that things arise on conditions. In fact, everything in conditioned existence arises on conditions. nothing is permanent. Nothing has an essential kind of nature which makes it what it is. Ourselves, other beings, everything in conditioned existence arises on certain conditions, lasts a little while its conditions endure, and then passes on, passes away. This is the nature, the substance of our conditioned existence. This is a very important element of the early Buddhist worldview. As it were, if you can tune into this, if you can start to notice this in one's own experience, one will be able to start to see the whole point of Buddhist practice, to let go of the belief that things last, that this me is an enduring kind of substance. One can begin to appreciate the constantly shifting possibilities of life and bring into existence new qualities. So my sense of the well of life in Norse mythology is that we could understand it as a symbol of the nourishing waters which are ever changing, ever moving, and coming into relationship with these waters is a bit like understanding the meaning of dependent arising in our lives, in the living reality, as it were, that in which we participate. So that's my thoughts on the well here. So I'm developing a sense of how the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree is not just an image of the historical location, as it were, of the Buddha's awakening, but gives us an image of the meaning of awakening as an ever-present possibility with depth. The practitioner, imaged as the Buddha, is sat at the right place, the centre of their existence, at the root of the cosmic tree, in relationship with the waters of life. Also in relationship with the wild forces of nature, imaged as the dragon. Now, I'm going to take another step here in terms of rethinking the image of the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree by making the suggestion that this whole complex of the cosmic tree of life, with the waters of life moving through it, can also be pictured in terms of the divine goddess. The goddess representing nature. Now, it could be that this is an image that's already familiar with you, or it could be one that doesn't resonate much. And what I want to suggest is that the image of the goddess might be one which can work for us, as it were, or at least in some sort of shadowy way it might speak to us. And I'd like to talk a bit more about this image of the goddess, to try and connect up the image of the Buddha with a form of mythic structure, as it were, which I think is very important for us now. So the image of the goddess is a divine feminine in the sense that nature has the characteristics of giving birth and sustaining. Yes, all of us are alive and sitting here, not just because our mothers have given birth to us, but because the very fabric of our being has been knitted, as it were, has formed through processes of growth and development which belong not to any human being, but to life as such. Of course, this is not so... We could put this in scientific terms, yes? we could put this in terms of biological processes, embryology, the way the embryo develops through all the stages of human development, of mammalian development, before the embryo becomes this little human being ready to be born. But what's really obvious is that no human being has any part of this development. Yes, it goes on. It goes on in the womb of its own accord. Life develops, and then out of it comes a human being who eventually becomes self-conscious. Yes? Here we are all, self-conscious human beings. You're listening to me talking, having thoughts, reflecting on what's being said, thinking whatever you're thinking about my talk. Self-conscious individuals, and yet your self-conscious individuality depends totally upon processes going on in your body which are given, which belong, as it were, to life. So, in a way, life, let's be bold, life herself has given birth to individual consciousness here, to self-consciousness embodied in these living organisms. Not only that, but we're continuously sustained by these same forces. Think about even digestion. Yes, our digestions, digestions are good because we have very little conscious control over our digestive processes. An amazing symbiotic kind of process of many, many millions of aerobic and anaerobic bacteria co-opted into helping us digest food. I say us, our bodies, doing what they do. I don't know what they do. We don't need to know, do we? Releasing nutrients into the bloodstream, which can then help us do what we do, as it were. What an amazing kind of process. All going on, as it were, in the background of our conscious awareness. Now, a really important aspect of talking about the goddess, talking about life as a kind of divine feminine, is that this power is also responsible for death. This same situation of finding ourselves born into existence with these extraordinary bodies which we didn't ourselves create and have limited sort of control over. Our dependence on these processes is equally has the outcome that we have very little control over the ending of our life process. And in that sense, death continuously appears to us or haunts our experience, as it were, as a possibility. The goddess appears to us as a terrifying kind of power of both birth and death. And so I'm suggesting that our cosmic tree with the life-giving waters gives us one image of our situation. The goddess of birth and life and death gives us another one, perhaps a slightly more personified image of our situation. One that is, in many ways, I think, a way of giving depth to everything we've begun to learn through scientific inquiry into the way life works, our situation on this earth. In a way, the goddess represents the whole. Ted Hughes talks about the goddess of complete being, which is an image of the whole living power in which we find ourselves existing. I think a beautiful image of this goddess that's occurred only in the last few years is the image of Gaia, of course, what's called Gaia, that image of the earth seen from outer space that James Lovelock has called Gaia, echoing that ancient Greek myth of the goddess Gaia, one of the titans along with Uranus, the god of the sky, who brought forth this world. Of course, Gaia was overthrown by later gods. Or was she? Maybe she's just underneath it all. And that brings us to the theme. I think this is quite an important theme of asking, well, what are we talking about here? Am I suggesting, you might be wondering, am I suggesting sort of a rejuvenation of ancient Greek mythology here, or some sort of melding of goddess paganism and Buddhism? Is that what he's suggesting? What kind of hippie philosophy is that? So I'd like to bring in a bit of left brain analysis here of what's going on. There's a very good historian of paganism called Ronald Hutton. Anybody come across Ronald Hutton's work? Yeah, he's written like The Triumph of the Moon, hasn't he? A history of modern paganism. Yeah, he's interesting because he's an excellent historian and also a pagan. And he's made the point that many pagan beliefs of, contemporary pagan beliefs present themselves as very ancient, but that presentation is in fact part of how they work. In fact, they're all new. They've all developed in the last 100 or 200 years, and they all have developed by presenting themselves as reinventions of ancient traditions, which isn't a criticism, it's just to say this is what they're like. And in just the same way, to talk of the goddess, on the one hand, is to say that the goddess represents the ancient power of life, which humanity has always kind of had some relationship with. On the other hand, we can acknowledge that this way of thinking is relatively new. In fact, Ronald Hutton traces it back to the Romantic poets. He thinks the first appearance of the goddess is in the poet Shelley. I went Keats, Yeats, Shelley. You get they're all at it. But Shelley's here's some lines from Shelley's Song of Proserpine. Sacred goddess, Mother Earth, thou from whose immortal bosom gods and men and beasts have birth, leaf and blade and bud and blossom, breathe thine influence most divine. This image of the goddess as Mother Earth, as the source and sustainer of life, who both gives life and takes it away, can be traced back to about 200 years ago to the Romantic poets, from whom it's caught on like a flame through Western imaginations, I think, giving us an image of the situation we live in at the same time, and this is the important thing about Romanticism, that we find ourselves in a quite different relationship with life through the processes of the Industrial Revolution. Yeah, the Industrial Revolution has enabled most of us, at least in the West, to live at some remove from the terrifying, dangerous aspects of the goddess, disease and death and starvation and all the rest of it that our ancestors had to put up with and probably very much hated. So these days, here we are, we can enjoy this festival with access to food, water, well, not a lot of electricity, but we've all come from our homes, which are probably, in one way or another, relatively safe places. And in that way, human life has become one where we're much more able to pursue our individual conscious lives. At the same time, the presence of nature, having receded a bit, can sort of personify much more clearly. Yeah, if we look, the nature can personify as this divine feminine, I think, much more clearly than ever before. And yet, this is a new development. This is not necessarily, we don't have to think of this as a very ancient sort of religious worldview. That would be a slightly inaccurate way to think about it. Um, so I've suggested that I need to link the Buddha up with this whole theme now, don't I? Because I'm trying to talk about the Buddha under the Bodhi tree and the qualities of the Buddha as being wild and natural and free. So I've tried to suggest that the Buddha's awakening was in relationship with wild natural forces. It is in no sense just a sort of humanistic achievement. By placing the image of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, I've tried to suggest that the Buddha's achievement of awakening is also, as it were, placing him in the centre of nature. It's by no means to remove, it's by no means removed from nature, rather it's at the centre of the whole living process. So what's left for me now is to try and talk about the Buddha and his awakening in terms of the goddess, to try and tease out this aspect of this rethinking of the mythology of Buddhism. So if we think of the tree of life and the water of the well together as it were, in another form, those two together as being something we can also envisage as the goddess, the question then arises of, well, what can be our relationship with life as this goddess? If individual human beings, as it were, find themselves in this situation, in relationship to this powerful divine feminine of birth, nourishing and death, what's Buddhism about? Now, the interesting thing about this human situation, I think, I say interesting, that's just a word, isn't it? What's powerfully obvious is that individual human consciousness, or not just individualised, conscious human being is a tremendously powerful force that's emerged from nature. Human beings have become the single most powerful species on the planet. Yes, we're making a tremendous difference, having a shaping effect on the ecosystem of the planet. I read the other day that 40% of land now is intensively cultivated, specifically for human use. Compared to, which is almost half of the whole surface of the earth. Maybe I mean like the cultivable land. I don't want to make it sound worse than it is if I've got my figures wrong. But there's 7 billion of us, all seeking a more and more sort of comfortable, secure life. So my suggestion here is that not so much that there's any need for Buddhists to, as it were, come into the relationship of simply worshipping the goddess, but rather the image of the goddess gives us a sense of the living presence that that we're constantly having to negotiate with, the background power of nature, which, as it were, of what we've got as human beings. So my final sense of the Buddha is that here is somebody who, imaged as sitting at the root of the Buddha tree, is someone who's come into relationship with the whole of living reality. As a conscious human being, somebody equipped with a mind, with reflexive self-consciousness, rather than seeking to escape this condition by imagining being somehow free of this human condition, the Buddha has rather turned and inquired into the nature of the goddess, as it were, has turned and taken his place at the root of the cosmic tree. There's a lot of images of the from ancient mythology of the goddess with a divine consort. Yes, a sun lover is one of the images from Middle Eastern mythology, and you've probably come across images from Catholicism of the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child. Yeah, her eyes upon the child looking out. So, not thinking too much about specific Christian meanings of that image right now, as a archetypal image, it gives us a picture of the much larger divine feminine with the conscious individual located in relationship to that, coming out of that background of powerful life. So my suggestion is that we could think of the Buddha as a bit like this kind of divine consort. This divine consort knows that life emerges out of the mysterious depths of nature. When I say knows, in some sense that's an intellectual knowledge. In another sense, at every moment we can look or inquire into what's happening in our experience. I think this is an important aspect of mindfulness. What we call mindfulness is noticing how our experience is arising. Lots of feelings and thoughts are arising within our organism, as it were, within our organic bodies, which aren't us. They're not. They don't belong to us, and we didn't create them, and yet they're responsible for the shape of our experience. They come from, as it were, they participate in the much deeper reality of life, which we, as it were, can also stand proud from as conscious beings. So we can understand that the Buddha's awareness to be one in which there's a knowledge of the power of life in the background, as a sort of mystery, as the constant mystery which we depend upon, and which will also envelop us again in the end. Not knowing that, we're constantly prey to the forces of nature. And I think this is where we can imagine a relationship here between this way of thinking and that Indian thought of the round of rebirth. Whilst we are in states of ignorance and craving, not knowing our relationship to the whole, there's going to be constant rebirth, constant re-becoming of suffering. And that image is obviously powerful for ancient Indians, but if it doesn't speak to us, I think we can think of the goddess as a sort of analogue of that. Whilst we aren't familiar in a deep way with how our individual consciousness relates to the forces of nature, we just find ourselves continually re-experiencing difficulty from not understanding the forces at work in our psyches. Whereas if following the Buddha we turn and look into the mystery of our existence, we come into conscious relationship with it, but without ever losing our individual consciousness. Now this still actually gives us not so much goddess paganism, but perhaps something not so very far from it. And I just want to conclude by indicating what's distinctive about the Buddha and Buddhism. And what's distinctive is that the Buddha's teaching is one which emphasizes how true freedom, the ability to give rise, to be not the sense of freedom as being able to do what we want, but freedom from limitation, from being stuck in whatever suffering and difficulty and constraint we feel. This kind of freedom comes from cultivating good qualities. Now, I need to put that in another way. The Buddha often identified the qualities of greed, hate and delusion as being those qualities which lead to difficulty, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. And the Buddhist path, in a way, consists of learning how to reduce those qualities through spiritual training in ethics and meditation, and cultivating instead the opposites, the qualities of generosity and content, generosity, love and wisdom. Generosity, love and wisdom. So my suggestion is that the Buddha is an image of someone who's free, in the sense that the specific genius of the Buddha, as it were, is not only to come in relationship to the goddess, but to be able to tune into the qualities of generosity, love and wisdom, which are very much aspects of nature, of the situation in which we find ourselves born and sustaining, but they're also qualities which we need to nourish to fully bring out. And this is the role of conscious individuality here, is to take the raw materials which have been given us, we know not where from the tree and the well, from the goddess, to take those materials, as it were, and to use what we've been given, this power of conscious individuality, the power of making decisions, the power of using our intelligence to shape the world, to cultivate these qualities that the Buddha developed to the fullest extent, and which are those associated with his awakening. I feel like I've not quite done justice there to that final part of my argument, as it were, because it's not really an argument. It's me trying to evoke a whole picture. But I wanted to draw the distinction between a kind of simply the idea that worshipping the goddess is great, and the idea that the Buddha is in a relationship with this goddess and yet is developing something new, bringing new qualities into the world. Qualities which, in a way, bring to completion, I'd say. That was the argument. So the kind of argument I wanted to make. They bring to completion the potential of life. And another kind of Shelley quote is that, it's not really a quote, is it? That the whole idea that human consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself. I think it's a very powerful image, isn't it? Is that human beings, human consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself. And I think that the Buddha's achievement was to be this awareness, to be the universe aware of itself, and bringing to birth new qualities, positive qualities, which take which take life to a new level of development. I'm slightly uncomfortable with that formulation. I think I'll finish just with another little a discourse, a little poem from the Buddhist canon. This is a set of lines I've been using in a study of the mindfulness of breathing sutta. And they're about the quality of mindfulness. whose mindfulness of breathing in and out is perfect, well developed, gradually brought to growth according to what the Buddha taught, that person illuminates the world like the full moon freed from cloud. That person illuminates the world like the full moon freed from cloud. So I wanted to suggest here, just as a concluding thought, that Buddhist practice is not necessarily about ourselves becoming more together and sorted, better human beings, but is to develop a quality which has an illuminating effect on the world around us, is beneficial in that sense. The Buddha, as a free human being, as it were, has this radiant effect on those around him, which is still felt today, I think, in the response we might have to the image of the Buddha. And it's perhaps not completely an accident that the full moon, or the moon itself, is also the image of the goddess. So the one who practices mindfulness of breathing illuminates the world like the full knowledge of the goddess. And on that thought, I'll conclude. Thanks very much.